Hello, students. We are going to be covering Chapter 5 today. So I will share my screen and get you those slides. Remember, these slides are all available on Canvas. So download those, follow along, take notes. This Chapter 5 starts the next unit of Chapters 5 through 8. So this will be the beginning of Unit 2. So let's get the slides up and get this larger. All right, perfect. So let's work on Chapter 5. So what we've got here is my settings are off for this. There we go, that's better. Sorry, my screen that I could see was not displaying how I wanted it to display. Now it's fixed, so we are all good. All right, so let's get into Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is about physical and cognitive development in early childhood. So if you remember those ages, that's about 3 to 5. So with that, we're going to be covering physical and cognitive development. There is quite a lot. Remember, in the beginning of the lifespan, so early childhood, there's a lot of research. So a lot of cognitive research has been done during this time. We're really going to cram it in here to just this one lecture, and we really have it just in this one chapter. I mean, lifespan development, as an example, in grad school, I had classes on child development, and it was an entire course that like these next two chapters cover. So there's a whole lot of content about this age group, but we're only covering it briefly within 1 week, within one lecture. So let's get this taken care of. So we'll start talking about physical changes, then we'll jump into cognitive changes, language development, and early childhood education. I do want to spend more time on like cognitive and other changes rather than physical changes, mainly because it's something I'm a little more interested in, which can kind of give you a clue. Maybe we'll have a little more focus on those things in the exam rather than memorizing facts about physical development. But there are aspects of physical development, especially cognitive development, that are very important. Just make sure that I am still recording. It looks like I am. So let's continue. So body growth and change in early childhood. The average child grows about 2.5 inches and gains about 5 to 7 pounds each year in early childhood. Girls are only very slightly smaller at the same age until about puberty, where girls usually hit puberty first and they outpace boys in growth, and then boys catch up later on because they hit puberty. At this time in early childhood, bodies are generally just lengthening, so getting taller, skinnier. This is why my daughter grows out of clothes and her pants become shorts seemingly very quickly, a lot quicker than I think they should, just by shrinking in the wash. So with that, there are body variations still. So there are children who are obviously a little shorter, maybe a little heavier or taller or slimmer. So most of that at this age is due to heredity rather than diet. So nutrition is a factor there, but a lot of the body differences at this age point is mostly due to heredity. So with that, let's jump to brain development. It has a huge impact on the cognitive changes that are happening at this time. As we talked about in very, very early childhood, infancy and whatnot, the brain is already pretty much the size it's going to be by age 2. But there are other things happening during this time. So the size isn't really changing, but the brain becomes a whole lot more dense. So a lot more axon branches, a lot more dendrites. So it's becoming more dense. Low income is correlated to less density, and maternal sensitivity is correlated to more density. So these are what we would call in developmental psychology a risk factor versus a protective factor. So risk factor is basically anything that could potentially be a risk to positive development. So if we think of that, if we think of the cascades, developmental cascades, a risk factor is something that might pull you towards maybe a more negative outcome in the future. Protective factor protects from those risk factors or even pushes you towards positive outcomes. So being low income is correlated, is a risk factor for less positive outcomes, less density in the neurons. Maternal sensitivity is correlated to more density in those neurons, and so more positive outcomes in the future. Other things, quicker gaining cognitive abilities quicker, things like that. So one thing that is happening right now, in early childhood, is that the prefrontal cortex is growing dramatically. So a lot of those dendrites and axon branches are happening there, making more connections there, more dendrites, more myelination. Again, the prefrontal cortex doesn't finish myelinating until about age 23, but there's a lot of work being done on it in early childhood. So try to remember, what does the prefrontal cortex do? Why is it important? Maybe review your notes from what we've covered in previous chapters. But hopefully you remember that prefrontal cortex comes into play for a lot of the cognitive functions that we have. So during this time with physical development, there is gross motor development throughout these ages. So moving around the environment at this time for a 3-year-old should be pretty automatic and easy. So think of preschoolers running around a yard. So they can run, they might be hopping, they might be jumping. At age 4, you might see more climbing and more testing of limits. Then by about age 5, they're probably a lot more adventurous, able to take a lot more risks. As an example, my children will play at the park together. One is now 6 and the other is 3. So the 6-year-old can do when they were 6 and 3. So 7, they were around this age at the end of it and the beginning of it. So comparing them was interesting, because the one who was nearing the end of early childhood versus the one that was just coming into early childhood had such different capacities. The younger one was trying to do the same as his older sister. She was climbing up ladders at the park, trying to go down big slides. He was trying to do the same thing, but not capable of it. Like, I would have to lift him up ladders, things like that, and basically carry him around doing all the things that she was doing. So these are the physical capacities that are gross motor things. So again, big muscle movements. With these things, this does have an aspect, or this does connect to social development and socio-emotional development, because if a child can't meet these benchmarks and does not have the same physical capacity, oftentimes they will be left out of things like team games, if friends are playing tag. As another example, going and hanging out with some of my friends, they have kids about the same age as our children. So with that, though, they're a little bit older. The youngest is about a year older than my youngest. So they're all physically capable of doing more than my youngest is. So oftentimes he'll get left behind. Like, literally, they will run away from him faster than he can catch up. And they will play other things that he can't. They'll climb up onto a bunk bed that he can't reach. He actually got up on the bunk bed this last week and couldn't get down by himself. So they left him there. So he was yelling through the house for the parents to come and help him. And the kids just left him there. They're like, well, you don't have the physical capacity to play our game, so we're just going to leave you up there. So you can see how that will change the dynamics of play and how that might influence the socio-emotional development of a young child. So with that, if they're not meeting the benchmarks of their same age peers, so if I was letting him play with someone the same age as him, or a group the same age as him, he might have lower motivation for sports, lower self-worth. It's easier when these kids are older, because he understands, especially since his sister is older, that he can't do everything that they can. So that's not as big of a deal, but if they're not meeting those benchmarks, they could be left out of things like that. Fine motor development. At age 3, children are still a little clumsy with picking things up and using their fingers and thumbs, but they're a lot more capable than they were earlier in infancy. At 4, they're a lot more precise. They can probably do a better job, like building Lego creations. And then at 5, they're pretty well developed with their fine motor coordination. So we mentioned nutrition a minute ago. What kids eat is going to have a big effect on both their skeletal development, their brain development, their body shape, and their future susceptibility to disease. So getting healthy eating habits early on at this time is very important. So eating with kids, like a caregiver eating with the children on a uh, predictable schedule is incredibly helpful, especially if the parents are eating healthy things, the kids are going to start eating healthy things. Looking at this picture, these kids are eating, looks like tomatoes, salad, that might be chicken, could be a baked potato. I can't really tell. Point is, if the caretakers are eating those things and letting the children try, even if they don't finish like a whole plate of these things, the kids are going to be more likely to eat those healthy things in the future. So modeling healthy eating is very important. Having fun at mealtime, making it into games, having them help cook. So we learned that one of my children really likes lettuce, just plain lettuce, after we showed her how to make a salad. Basically, take the lettuce, take some tomatoes, some dressing. I think it was that simple. Put them together. And so she was really excited to try what she had created. She realized she really liked lettuce. She didn't like tomatoes at that time. Since then, she likes tomatoes now. So she'll just ask for a tomato. I give her a tomato or an apple. She's fine either way. So that's a good thing. So young children can become overweight though. So many foods kids eat, especially processed foods, have a lot of trans fats, which raise cholesterol, increase risk of heart disease. This is a problem later in life too. So watch that. French fries, potato chips were the most commonly eaten vegetable of 2 to 3 year olds in 2010. Not great. So about 12% of 2 to 5 year olds are obese now, and that's a higher number than, or a higher percentage than it was in 1980. So if you are overweight in childhood, you're much more likely to continue to be overweight in adulthood. But there's also a problem with malnutrition. So especially with children of low income families, they often aren't obtaining the vitamins and minerals and protein that they need to grow appropriately and have proper brain development, things like that. So WIC is a program. It stands for Women, Infants, and Children. It provides states with different grants to provide healthy food to low-income families when their children are up to age 5. So it's very helpful. It has shown some really good results of increasing cognitive benefits, hiding your reading skills in kids that are on it versus not, and overall healthier kids physically. So with that, nutrition, physical growth, exercise is a really big important thing for children. Young children need to be physically active a lot of the day. So you can kind of think about it being about 15 minutes per hour or about 3 hours total per day. One big key thing that the book points out is that children's lives should center around activities. So going to the park, playing soccer, building Legos, playing tag, rather than around meals. A lot of times, as parents, especially myself, I try to like schedule things. Okay, this time, like 11:30 is about when lunch will start to be cooked. 4:45 is when dinner will start to be cooked, that kind of thing. And so we kind of plan around that. But it's better to plan the children's lives around activities that they'll be doing to make sure that they get enough activities versus when I don't plan activities, they end up playing for a little while and then maybe asking to watch a show. So activities are better. So the leading causes of death for early children are accidents and unintentional injuries. So be watchful of that. They're trying to test limits as they're growing, climbing up on bunk beds. So got to be careful of those bunk beds, you know. I had one as a kid too, and I survived, and luckily my son has survived up to this point. So, oh, that was really a dark joke. I kind of want to delete this part of the video, but I won't. Editing a video is harder than it sometimes is worth. So, other leading causes of death are things from birth defects, deformities, and chromosomal abnormalities. Tobacco smoke is a really large risk factor for early children as well. So that's one of those risk factors, developmental risk factors. It might not lead to death right at this time in their life, but it could later on. So let's jump into cognitive development. I know there's more in your book about physical development. I really wanted to touch on those key pieces and then jump into cognitive and language development and things like that. So during this time, again, we've talked about Piaget before. we're going to talk about them basically through adolescence. So you can see these different stages. Today we're going to talk about the pre-operational stage, which Piaget felt was about from 2 to 6 years old. So with that, that fits right in line with our early childhood that we're talking about here, from about 3 to 5. So Piaget thought that at this time, children were starting to form a concept of the world, starting to develop reason, and use words to represent the world. And that was all because of cognitive development. He said that children were very egocentric, so they couldn't really distinguish between other people's perspectives, and that with that, he wasn't saying that they were egocentric in the fact that they were selfish and they weren't trying to take others' perspectives, just that cognitively they were not capable yet of taking other people's perspectives. So it's just a developmental phenomenon. It's not saying young children are ignoring people. It's that they cognitively don't have the capacity, is what Piaget was saying. And today, this lines up pretty well with what we understand about the theory of mind. So the theory of mind is a person's own awareness of the mental process of other people. So if you're watching this, you almost certainly understand that other people have different thoughts or different feelings, different perspectives than you do yourself. So little children, it doesn't appear that they have that theory of mind until maybe 2, 3, 4, somewhere around there. So let's watch a little video about this. And hopefully I can get I might actually need to stop the screen share and turn on sharing computer sound. So I will do that so we can watch this little video about the theory of mind. Again, sometimes the audio is great when I'm recording these, sometimes it's not. If it's not, go click this link in your documents. This is a relevant video that we'll watch right now. All right, I'm still recording. Good. Let's screen share the proper way and share. That. All right, let's hope this works better this time. Oops, I rewatched it to make sure this was the video I was thinking of earlier, and I watched it at a faster speed. I am going to have it a little bit faster. Feel free to watch it at normal speed, but yeah, not that fast.
Well, you've probably discovered that however smart your 3-year-old is, she doesn't seem able to put herself in someone else's mental shoes to imagine how they think and what they believe. Perhaps you thought your parenting skills were to blame, but scientists suggest that understanding other minds is a skill that may not be fully developed until a child is about 4. To learn how children's social skills evolve between about 3 and 4, researchers use something called a false belief test. What do you think's in this box? Looks fairly obvious, doesn't it? Clothes? Let me show you. I've got it full of candles. Right? Now close it up again. While you and I have been having this conversation, Snoopy's been down here, asleep. Doesn't know what we've talked about. But let's bring him into the conversation. Now I have another question for you. What do you think Snoopy will say if I ask him what's in this box? Clothes, obviously. What else could anybody possibly say? Well, what's this 3-year-old? What do you think is inside this box? Let's open it and see. Hello. Now, you can ask the child what appears to be a very simple question about that. What did you think was inside the box when you first saw it? They say, oh, I always thought that there were candles in this box. Then you can ask them about someone else. So you can ask them about Snoopy. Snoopy's been sitting here. He hasn't seen this box. He's never seen something else. What does Snoopy think is inside this box? Candles. Doesn't say the same thing. Snoopy will think there are candles inside this box. And what that indicates is that the children's view of how minds work is very, very different from the view in reality. Did you see it? In the mind of the 3-year-old, everyone sees the world much the same way. There's no difference between what I think and believe and what everyone else, including Snoopy, thinks and believes. It is, in a sense, a naive and innocent view of the world, a kind of mental Eden. And then, about 4, comes the fall from grace. Now, if you take the 4-year-old, quite typically the 4-year-old will tell you that, as a matter of fact, he thought there were clouds in the box. Well, he found out that there were clouds in the box. You could ask him about Snoopy, and he'd say, oh, no, Snoopy wasn't about clouds in this box. Because it's a clean box. And then, you got the 5-year-olds who are just utterly blasé and think that this is such an obvious thing, it's so easy to ask the question. What that says is that by the time children are 4 or 5, they have a view of the mind that's much more like 5-year-olds in mind. They understand that things can be tricky and deceptive, that you can change your mind, that things aren't always the way that they seem, and that gives them a very different vision of how the mind works and how people.
All right, so with that, it seems as if the theory of mind doesn't emerge. And again, this is one of those problems with studying this kind of cognitive capacity. You can't ask a 3-year-old, hey, do you have a theory of mind? They're not going to understand what that means. So we have to use these kinds of observational methods to try and figure out and assess, well, do they have a theory of mind? Do they have a sense of what other people are thinking? So with that being said, theory of mind might develop earlier. There's some evidence that it can even develop at about age 2. But using these behavioral methods and observations, this is about the best that we can tell. So with that, children who talk to parents about their emotions frequently, so the parents are sharing their emotions, the children sharing their emotions and talking about that. Maybe they're watching Daniel Tiger a lot. Daniel Tiger does a really great job talking about his emotions and controlling them and using proper skills for that. So definitely Daniel Tiger is approved by at least this developmental psychologist. So with that, children who are getting that more often from their caretakers do better at theory of mind tasks. So another example or another reason for this might also be better executive functioning. Part of that might be because of prefrontal cortex development. It seems that it's probably pretty central to the theory of mind that once things get connected up enough in the prefrontal cortex, once a child has enough experience with people around them, seeing other people's reactions that are different than their own to certain things, that the neural development as well as the experience of saying, oh, well, my sibling is scared here where I think it's excited versus my parents think it's silly. Those kinds of different reactions as well as those connections within the brain, maybe it takes all those together to make it so the theory of mind is a possibility. So children with autism seem to have a difficult time developing theory of mind. Some theorists suspect that there's an innate theory of mind mechanism that maybe children with autism lack. So with that, it seems in any case, whether there is an innate mechanism to learn theory of mind, it does seem that theory of mind is more easily grasped by more neurotypical children. So let's jump to another aspect of cognitive development. You've read in your book about Piaget's conservation test to see if children can mentally reverse and adjust things within their mind. So these different cups have the same amount of water in this little pitcher. You pour it into a taller cup or a flask and then see what the child will think. So I'm just going to watch 1 or 2 of these because they're a little fun to watch. But after that, we'll jump back into talking about more cognitive development.
Does this one have more quarters? Does this one have more quarters? Or are they the same? The same. The same? Okay. Now, does this one have more quarters? Does this one have more quarters? Or are they the same? This one has more quarters. Has more quarters? Or has more quarters? Because it's flat down. Because it's flat down. Okay. But how many are in this one? So
So feel free to watch more of that one. It's really interesting if you want. I think that gets the point across about these conservation of mass tests. Um, and they really show that at this age, some children can really well mentally reverse events that happen. I think it also does a really good job of showing a standardized test. So asking these specific questions, doing these specific motions to be very standardized with every child participant. It also shows that in some of these cases, the results might be from error of the child understanding the question, understanding what the researcher is looking for. So as an example, that sliding the stick over there, maybe the child didn't thought that the tester was asking about which one extends longer versus which is totally longer. So there can always be that kind of problem too. So with that, more recent research suggests that this kind of ability happens earlier than what Piaget thought. So Piaget made some really good observations, but more recent research shows that it's probably earlier than he was thinking. Another theory is a social constructivist approach to learning. So this emphasizes, and we've talked about this before, you might recognize Vygotsky and zone of proximal development. I use that as an example of a theory in, I believe, our very first lesson. So the zone of proximal development, and specifically the social constructivist approach, emphasizes that the social context, the social environment that children are in, is really important to the learning experience. So a child will learn and experience through their environment, through their interaction with people socially. So friends, parents, caregivers, parks, their room, their toys, they will experience these things. And through these social interactions, they learn about the environment. They learn the tools that a culture says are important. So learning about books, how to use books, why books are important. A tool of the culture now that's important is literally, say, a smartphone versus my social context growing up, smartphones didn't exist. So that was not a tool of the culture that I had any idea how to use, just as one specific example. So my kids know how to use a smartphone pretty well. They can get to YouTube and get to their games while I'm trying to cook them dinner. So this is a really good video on the zone of proximal development. It describes it in a lot more detail than we will go into here. We're not going to watch it together right now, but definitely I recommend watching it to get more background on the zone of proximal development. So with this, you have this zone here in the middle of the target of what you are capable of, or in this case, what a child, an early childhood child, is capable of. So what they can do versus what they can do with help is this purple one, and that is the zone of proximal development. So that's the skills they are developing that they're developing with help. That can be a teacher, that can be a parent, a friend is teaching them these new skills, like say climbing a ladder to get onto a bunk bed. So when we got to my friend's house and my child wanted to climb up onto this bunk bed, they weren't capable of it. But their friends showed them how to do it, helped them see where to put their hands and feet. With that help, it became something that then my child was capable of. So that was then what he could do with help, became part of what he could do by the end of that day. Still can't climb down, but sure that will come soon. So learning is a continuous development and building on itself. And so you're thinking the culture, the environment that you're in will teach you the things that are important for that environment. Things that are important for the environment here might be different for a different family, a different part of the world, things like that. You could think of this as like a positive upward spiral, learning and building on the skills that you have. Another word for this is scaffolding. That is changing the specific levels of support for a child as they gain abilities. So let's take math, learning math. My daughter is trying to teach her little brother math, and she will show him addition. She'll show him adding 3-digit numbers together, and he doesn't yet recognize numbers. So the support level that he needs is much lower than what she's trying to give him. So to scaffold appropriately, she really needs to be at his level. So that's basically what scaffolding is teaching at that level. So try to fit the guidance to the needs and current performance of that child. So we tell her, hey, you need to teach him how to recognize these numbers. He's heard and he can say the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but he doesn't recognize them all yet. So teach him that, then later on you can teach him addition. Another example of this in my own life is I was in undergrad, so getting bachelor's degree and whatnot, I had a lot of direct instruction. So a teacher kind of talking at me, very similar to I'm talking at you right now. So I had a lot of direct instruction. Do this assignment, do this paper, learn about this thing. And so I had very direct scaffolding, so very direct support, versus as time has gone on and I'm working on my PhD now, I have the freedom to choose my own topics of study. So I'm doing research projects that are completely separate from my professors now. So so the scaffolding I need is different than it was before. So how do we apply this? How do we apply this zonoproximal development? Well, one thing you can do is assess the child's zonoproximal development, see what they are capable of, what you can teach them with help. So try and then teach them in different ways within that realm, that zonoproximal development. Teach near the upper edge of the zonoproximal development if possible. Have more skilled peers be teachers. An example of this is my daughter is in the dual immersion program. And so she was having a tough time doing her math because she was learning it in Spanish. And so she was struggling with it, but the teacher sat her next to a child who already spoke Spanish fluently and could translate to my daughter. So having that more skilled peer helped my daughter be within that zone of proximal development and get the support and the scaffolding that she needed to be able to then excel in that class. So encourage children's use of private speech for problem solving. I'll be honest, when I am solving hard problems, I still do this. I literally talk to myself about the problem. Encourage children to do that. When I've been doing homework with my daughter at home, she feels embarrassed when I hear her talking about it. So I'll hear her say something about like how to solve a math problem, for example. And I'll say, oh, good job. You're thinking about that in the right way. And she hates that. She hates to be seen doing her work and working through it, which I understand. I was the same way when I was a kid. But encourage them to do that, to talk the problems out. It can really help. So make sure the context for the instruction is meaningful. So solve problems that matter to the child. So, well, why is counting important? Why are these numbers important? Well, you need to add this many dollars and this many dollars to get the Hatchimal toy you want. Those kinds of things. Play learning. Those are important too. So I know I'm using a lot of math examples. I think it's easy to connect. Math is really like step by step. You learn one thing, then build on another. So I think it's a easy analogy, but this works for other things other than just math. So there is a good curriculum called the Tools of the Mind curriculum that takes a lot from the zone of proximal development and Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. So this is a good video about that. If you want to learn more about that curriculum, maybe even a good place to start for a question paper for another one that you would do. All right, so this is not really relevant unless this is part of your discussion board, and then that'll be in a different way. So that's an activity I will do in class, but not online in the same way. So information processing at this time for children is, like we talked about before, attention is a key critical piece of information processing of cognitive abilities. So with that, at this time in early childhood, children are gaining executive attention. So they're getting better at planning, at paying attention to goals that they have, whether that goal is, I want to play soccer with these friends, or whether that goal is, I want to get that cupcake. They're better at attending to errors or problems or mistakes that they've made and monitoring their progress on the way to that. So one piece of that is sustained attention. So vigilance and focus on that one specific thing. So that takes extended engagement with that object, that task, that event. And some of the biggest developments in that happen in these preschool years. So with that, early children still struggle with what is salient information versus and salient and relevant versus things that are not salient and relevant. So they will still attend to novel stimuli. So something bright and shiny or different that happens off to the side, they might get easily distracted by that still. So they might not focus on something important, especially when there's something strange or new happening. This does improve around 6 to 7 with more cognitive control of attention. So planfulness, they'll often judge for things haphazardly than weighing and examining things systematically, as maybe an adult might do. So as an example, I will ask my kids when they wake up, hey, what do you want for breakfast? Do you want waffles? Do you want eggs? Do you want cereal? And oftentimes they will both say just any random thing that pops in their head. Even if this is the same thing that they've had many days and they were sick of it yesterday, they'll say, I want waffles. And so I'll say, okay, I'll start making your waffles, and then I'll start making myself an egg. And they'll be like, oh, actually, I like eggs better than I like waffles. Will you please make me eggs? I'll go, okay, you can have this egg that I was making for myself, and I will maybe eat your waffle instead. And that's why I eat too many carbs, because I eat all my kids' waffles. That's the moral of that story. Anyway, no, I've been doing a better job at not eating their waffles. And they've been doing a better job at stopping and thinking about what they want and developing that planfulness. So this is all also related to memory. So we've talked a little bit about memory. We'll go into a little bit more detail here. So memory is just that retention of information over time, and that's very important for cognitive development. So short-term memory is essentially things that we can retain for about 30 seconds with no rehearsal. So you might remember at this point that I told a story about some breakfast foods. You probably didn't rehearse that or rerun over that in your mind, but you might remember that that was about like cereal, waffle, and eggs because it was still in your short-term memory. So the short-term memory is even more limited in early childhood. So a 2-year-old can remember probably about a 2-digit sequence, and a 7-year-old seems to be able to remember about 5 digits. And that's about where it stays throughout life. So accuracy of memory is also improving. So as a reminder, memories are these networks of neurons that are connecting. So when you're remembering things, you're literally reactivating some of those same neurons. So because of that, accuracy is improving. This child has had more capacity or more time, more experiences. So a lot more things can connect to make that memory more accurate. So preschoolers' memory are the most susceptible to misleading or incorrect information. So things like prompting for events or information that are incorrect can actually distort a preschooler's memory. So if they're trying to remember what happened at a birthday party a week ago, and you say, oh, did you have fun with XYZ friend who wasn't even there? They might literally remember that friend there, and that memory might then stick. It's possible. It's not necessarily definitely going to happen, but it is possible to alter their memories in a way that they remember that friend was there at that party when that friend really wasn't. So autobiographical are those story memories, those memories that you might write in an autobiography, that story of what happened at that birthday party, who was your first grade teacher, what did you do on your favorite vacation. So from about 3 to 5 years of age, you can remember events more specifically, include more detail, more information. Another example of this, we've got a calendar in our house that basically has collages of the things that happened that month in the previous year. So today we switched it over to another month, and we had pictures of a trip we took to Dinosaur National Monument. So I asked my children, hey, do you remember this? And the older one did. They were like, oh yeah, I liked that. I like to see these dinosaur bones. And I showed my other child, the younger one, these, and didn't really remember much of it. So remembered that we went camping, remembered that there was a fire, that we ate s'mores. But other than that, didn't remember any of these specific details as my older child. So that actually brings up a really interesting point, because this is a time when memories can be more susceptible to misleading information. So one important aspect of research is actually sexual abuse in children. And it's a very difficult thing, especially for courts and, say, police to investigate, because depending on how questions are asked, it can prompt and lead to misremembered events. So this is a very important topic. If it's ever relevant to you in your life, here are a bunch of different resources for how to ask questions of children that you think might potentially have been abused, because you don't want to, you want to get at that information. If child abuse has happened, you definitely want to know about it and take care of that, but you also don't want to lead that child in your questions. You don't want to ask leading questions. So a bunch of resources here, some key points to remember, and we won't go into too much detail. That's why I gave like a whole page of resources. Ask open-ended questions that aren't leading. So ask about who was there, what happened, when, where. So how did that happen? What happened? Who was there? How did it make you feel? Those kinds of things that are open-ended. You don't say, was Uncle Blank doing this? Or was Aunt Blank doing this? You don't ask that kind of specific directed question or lead them to that. So yes, no questions are not great. Asking them really open-ended questions is the best. So another example was, how did the other person, so you told me you did this, how did this person react? Tell me about your relationship with this person. How do you see your future with this person? So some examples of what you should not ask are questions like, was blank what happened? Did this happen? Isn't it true that blah, blah, blah? Would you agree that blah, blah, blah? So basically any declarative sentence followed by, is that right? Is that correct? Not great for finding out about child abuse. So if you're ever needing to ask children about this topic, use these resources, remember these key points. You can definitely save these resources and come back to them at a later time. Hopefully it's not necessary, but it's important to be able to get at that information, because memories can be altered at this time in childhood, and you want to be able to get these facts. So with it, let's move on to a different topic, executive function. We mentioned this a little bit. At this time, there's a lot of great advantages, a lot of it because of the neural development and the physical development of the brain and neurons. So cognitive inhibition, which is essentially stopping an action that you're doing. Cognitive flexibility, changing, focusing on another topic, trying a different route, goal setting, and delay of gratification. You might have heard of like the marshmallow experiment, where you put a marshmallow in front of a child, you say, hey, you can eat that now, or if you wait till I come back, I'll give you 3 marshmallows, and see if they can delay that gratification. So that ability gets a lot better at this time as well. And these are all really important because of all the factors within the social context that children are processing at any given moment to learn things. So let's watch another YouTube video about this process, and that gives you a better idea of what exactly are children dealing with on a day-to-day basis that they're trying to process and understand. Because as we get older, we're doing the same things, but we've been doing it for a long time. We've learned how to do it well, and children are still just starting to learn how to do these things. So let's watch this really quick.
Science tells us that minds are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation. Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors. We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce. What should you have done next? educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them. What is executive function? Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on lots of runways and really exquisite timing and so on. Turnout has to manage a lot of information, avoid distractions. We really think of that as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn. But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that calls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves. If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout and so then you miss part of the learning that's going on and then you are more upset because you're behind and so you act out and so you get this downward spiral. How does executive function develop? And with children, and even, in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated. The prefrontal cortex, or the front third of the brain, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain.
Oops, I had it on mute. So hopefully that gives you a lot better idea of these different processes. And I really like that air traffic controller analogy because children, just like us, we right now, you're watching this, you're hearing it, maybe you're hungry, maybe you have plans later, maybe you have an exam coming up and you're reviewing this, you're taking notes. So there's a lot of things happening. When you're in social situations as a child, lots of things are happening. So you've got to collect all that information, use it, plan what you're going to do, remember those plans, inhibit what maybe your drive is to take the toy from someone, or remember that you have to stop playing and share, things like that. So at this time, more play, more interactions with more people will help this develop better. So the more time you have to interact with other people socially will really help this executive function do a lot better. Good nutrition so that you're healthy and you're not hungry, good sleep. These will help children do this better as well. So let's talk about language development. So from 2 to 3, children move quickly from 3 to 5 word sentences to more complex sentences. So with that, they're doing a better job at learning the phonology or the sound system of the language. So what the language sounds like. So you probably heard in some of the videos we've watched today, the younger kids versus the older kids maybe talk a little bit differently. So they're learning how to combine sounds, how to combine words together. They're also learning the morphology, the meaning of the words, how to use plurals and possessives and forms of nouns. Some of us, like myself, still struggle with using the correct forms of nouns, tenses, past, present, future tense. I am absolutely terrible at that still to this day. Um, totally off topic, but I failed a exam in high school and a paper because my tenses were so bad. And still, I get comments from like editors or other people that I'm writing papers with. And they're like, "You've switched your tense here between this paragraph and this paragraph. You need to be consistent." Um, I will probably never figure that out. Anyway, that was really just very tangentially relevant. So, with that, this is a skill that children are learning at this time in early childhood. A lot of times you can see errors with over a generalization of rules. So, you might hear children say foots instead of feet. So, my teeths, and using S as a plural, my eyes, that makes sense, but my foots or my teeths, they're overgeneralizing that rule of putting an S at the end of a plural. I goed to school instead of I went to school. So you'll hear these kinds of overgeneralizations. So they're also learning more about syntax and semantics. So how do we combine words to form sentences versus semantics is more of the meaning of those words and sentences. So with that, children are learning these skills and very, very, very many words very quickly at this time. So like we talked about last time, there's that area of your brain that is really primed to learn language at this time in early childhood. So little children are really adept at learning any language. So multiple languages at the same time. Children learn the words that they hear most often. So with that, reading to them, speaking to them, letting them be exposed to lots of different words is very useful. So they learn the words for things and events that are interesting to them. So I have this example here. My youngest child, about a year ago now, started saying something that we couldn't really understand. We couldn't understand what the word was. It sounded like corn nummies to us. We thought it was corn nummies. And so we thought, did he hear the word corn? Does he want to eat that? But he said it so often. And he would pick up little toys and he would put them in a tube. This will become relevant in a minute. He would put these corn nummies in a tube and say, look at all the corn nummies I collected. I don't think he used the word collected, but look at my corn nummies is what he would say. And then he would pour them out and say, look, here's a blue corn nummie. So what he was actually saying, and we realized over time as he got better at speaking, but it literally took us weeks to figure this out as he got better at saying this thing, is he was saying core memories. He was pretending that, like the movie Inside Out, that all these little toys, whether they were balls or marbles, Legos, that they were core memories. There was a blue core memory, a green core memory, a red core memory, and he was putting them in a recall tube. He was putting them in a tube that in his mind was a recall tube. So he learned that word, core memories, or those couple words, because it was interesting to him, because he cared about it. So with that, children will learn words best in responsive and interactive contexts rather than in more passive contexts. So just watching, I don't know, let's say a National Geographic thing, a show about space, the Magic School Bus, that's really passive. You're not really participating there. Versus if I talk to my children about what we're learning, they'll learn more words, they'll hear more language in different ways. Being more interactive is better. Also, if it's a meaningful setting, if it matters to them, they're interested in food, you're teaching them about foods or different words about cooking, learning words when they have clear access to the meaning of that word. So core memories was pretty clear. It was these little memory balls in the movie. So that was pretty clear and easy. But other things, they don't understand the words to. So the more diversity in grammar and vocabulary that children can be exposed to, the better, because then they'll learn more grammar and vocabulary. So with that, it's best to use the language, the appropriate form of language in different contexts. So seeing a lot of variety of language at home, at school, at grandma's, at the park. Younger children can engage in extended conversations. They are capable of it. They might not be able to say all the words, but if you help repeat back to them, make sure that you understand what they're saying, and then they can hear it in different ways so that they get better at it. And they'll develop the ability to speak about things that aren't present. So, do you remember our car at home? Um, Things like that. So around 4 to 5, they can speak to an adult more formally than they do a peer. They realize that there's those different language rules. So that is a lot of the basics about how to teach language to children in early childhood. This goes for other languages too. So again, children are really good and their brain is attuned to learning language. So learning 2, 3, 4 languages at the same time, even for young children, does not diminish their cognitive capacity. It actually increases it. It doesn't make them behind in school. It's really useful to learn more than one language for young children, and a lot easier for them to do it then versus an adult or a high schooler even. High school was the first time I had the opportunity to learn a second language. And by that time, those areas of my brain were programmed now to do other tasks. So with that, this also relates to reading. Have conversations about books. So I was reading Calvin and Hobbes comics to my son as a bedtime story, also my daughter. I love Calvin and Hobbes. So we have conversations about what was Calvin thinking when he jumped the wagon off the jump? What did he think was going to happen? Those kinds of things. Ask them to predict what will happen next. Calvin just jumped off the jump. What do you think is going to happen when I turn this page? Calvin's coming home. What do you think Hobbes is going to do when he comes home? He's going to tackle him, right? So have the kids ask their own questions about the stories. Choose books that use language differently. So rhymes in books, sing-songy things, different kind of poetry even that can be in books. A wide variety of types of books is very, very useful for increasing children's reading ability. So let's talk about school specifically. Let's talk about early childhood education. So we're going to hit a couple different examples. There are many more examples of early childhood education. We're just going to hit these couple. So child-centered kindergarten is focused on nurturing. So educating and promoting a child in physical aspects. So food, nutritious foods, maybe nap times, cognitive, as well as socio-emotional development. So they focus on firsthand experiences, painting, playing games, doing reading. They do experimenting, exploring, speaking, listening to each other. So that's called child-centered, or this kind of approach is generally what child-centered kindergarten does. Montessori, on the other hand, gives children a lot of freedom. You can see this kind of setup is pretty standard of what you might see at a Montessori school. So they can choose their own activities, and teachers help show how to perform different intellectual activities, and they will help when the child asks. So it helps to develop self-regulation. The child will go and choose their own tasks. They will learn things that they're interested in. With that, it does seem to have the benefits of fostering independence in young children and help build cognitive skills. It makes it so it's more active and interactive for the child. But some criticisms of the Montessori approach is that the benefits do seem to disappear by the 3rd or 4th grade. So comparing a child who was in Montessori versus our previous example that we just used, and my slides aren't going back to show it, child-centered kindergarten. That's all right, it won't go back to it, so maybe we'll just go back forward. So compared to no preschool, at about 3rd or 4th grade, they don't seem to be doing any better academically. And also Montessori doesn't emphasize or support socio-emotional development as much as, say, child-centered kindergarten or other approaches do. So these are just 2 examples of approaches. Here's some more research links specifically for Montessori. I had a colleague who did a lot of work on Montessori schools, so here's a lot of good resources there. There's another approach that is the developmentally appropriate education, and this is more guidelines than rules. So it's guidelines rather than a specific curriculum to follow. It focuses on how to teach. So kind of looking at the zone of proximal development, helping to teach, play, and give dramatic play. There's a lot more focus on socio-emotional development, so the interaction between peers, working on understanding and controlling emotions, working on those executive functioning skills. So with that, there's also, they create, if you're trying to do this, you would create settings that are appropriate for children of their age. So with 3-year-olds, you might have certain toys or certain things versus 5-year-olds, you might have other things that are available to them. You might have calculators for 5-year-olds, but not the 3-year-olds, that kind of thing. So it tries to focus on individual development and what the individual needs, and tries to build cooperation, problem solving, critical thinking, and self-regulation. So of these three, developmentally appropriate education, Montessori, and child-centered kindergarten, which is best? Maybe take a minute to think about it yourself. The things that we've talked about so far. The only one I really talked about criticisms was for Montessori, but that doesn't mean that there's not other criticisms of the other two as well. So which is best? Well, each program does show positives. There's no one perfect program for all children and in all contexts, and that's perfectly fine. What's worked well for my oldest child might not work as well for my youngest child. So with that, figuring out what will help foster development of a child will be the best thing. So trying to do it as individually, finding their zone of proximal development, giving them the socio-emotional opportunities that they need. And if that's best done in a Montessori setting versus a child-centered kindergarten versus looking at the approach of that we just talked about, developmentally appropriate education, whichever one of those works best for that child is good. So focus on any program of any early childhood education program should focus on the cognitive growth of children, the physical growth of children, and the socio-emotional growth of children. Most programs, even in recent past, have done a good job at looking at that cognitive and physical development of children, but there is still a lot of programs that exist that don't focus enough on that third piece, that socio-emotional development. And that socio-emotional development, learning within our cultures, learning with interactions with peers, learning how to control emotions, how to develop those executive functions, those are very important for later on down the line, our socio-emotional relationships. So we need all three of those to have a good early childhood education program: cognitive development, physical development, and socio-emotional development. So you might even, for myself, when I'm looking at schools and things to put my kids into, I focus on that socio-emotional development piece, also because it's one of the pieces I'm most interested of in developmental psychology. So that might be part of it too, but it's the one that's kind of the newest to be added to curriculums and things like that. So that's the one I kind of emphasize, because the other ones, we've got a lot of research, a lot of time, a lot of people trained to do cognitive or physical development in children, but not as many for socio-emotional. So we've touched on a lot of topics from chapter 5. Those are the things that I think are the most important for you to take away from that. Definitely read the entire chapter, because there are a lot of other facts and pieces that could come up in your exam, as well as will be relevant for later on learning about development down the line. But that is chapter 5 for us, and we'll move on to chapter 6 next time.